right. Hello, parents. Happy Tuesday, and providers, if there's providers joining us too. Welcome to the Happy Medium Approach, our kind of parent learning series. My name is Rosalie Prendergast. I'm a board certified behavior analyst. We've got a small practice in Evergreen, Colorado. And we've developed a helpful approach called the Happy Medium Approach. So here to share some helpful things with you guys. You're going to find the PDF that I'm going to be sharing today in that green button below me. Also in there is a link to a feedback form. So feel free to give us feedback. Let us know kind of what information would be helpful for you. We definitely want to gear this parent learning series kind of towards you guys and what you guys are wanting to hear, not just kind of us professionals kind of blabbing at you. Also, feel free to use the chat feature if you have questions about what we're talking about, or you would like to add a comment or, ask us to clarify. That chat feature is great. I am not as good at looking at the questions if you use the question button, just because it pops up in a different part of my screen that I can't see. So please do use the chat. And you're always welcome to reach out to me as well via email, which is just Rosalie at Eclipse Therapy. All right, I am going to share my screen and we will get started today. All right. There we go. And I am using Crowdcast version 2.0, so we might have some glitches today while I learn this new kind of layout and system, but hopefully it turns out well. So today we're talking about motivation, right? I've got no motivators. When I find one, my child burns it out and, I'm back to having nothing. I'm back to kind of sitting in this space of no motivation, probably high behavior, until we find that next motivating item or action or location or, activity to play. You'll find our feedback form right below the title in this PDF. So if you'd like to give us some feedback, tell us how we did today, tell us other things that you'd like us to talk about, that feedback form is available for you guys. We are going to start off, as always, with our shared purpose matrix. This is part of acceptance and commitment therapy. It's a helpful tool. It's a helpful noticing tool to notice kind of both internal experiences and external experiences. You'll notice on the bottom, we have mental experiencing. On the top, we have 5 senses experiencing. And then I'm going to start off in our kind of lower right-hand corner, and I am going to ask the first question, which is who or what is important to you in our shared purpose today, talking about motivation. And the first thing I'm going to say is our children. Our children are really important. Parents, RBTs, BCBAs, our collaborators, right? The other therapists that we work with, teachers are important in this discussion. I think funders are important in this discussion. I think other things that are important are dignity, autonomy, respecting differences, or respecting uniqueness is really what I want to say. I don't know if I'm going to spell that correctly. You're going to see lots of red lines for me. So I think that's a pretty nice list of kind of who or what's important here. Well, and I guess I should say finding success, right? We need some motivation to find success and to contact what's important to us. All right. So I'm going to move over to our kind of lower left-hand quadrant. This is stuff that's kind of inside of us, right? It's not something we can language about it, and it becomes more known, it becomes more salient. But these are things like emotions or thoughts that we have, things like that. So when we're talking about motivation, what yucky stuff shows up, what gets in the way of these things that are important to us? And the first one I'm going to say is frustration. and confusion, right? Like, why isn't this motivating to you? Like, why can't I get you to do more than one thing? I think old rules come to play. Like, this is something that was motivating for me when I was little, so therefore it should be motivating to you. I think sometimes I get a little bit sad about kind of when I've lost motivation for an individual. It's sad, right? Because you watch them be super successful when you've got this motivating carrot, right? And then, all of a sudden you don't have that anymore, and they're not contacting things in the same way as they were when you had that carrot. Sometimes a little worry shows up. Is that am I ever going to get that motivation back? I get pretty impatient. Right? Come on, we've got to find that next thing. Then all of a sudden I'm like throwing the kitchen sink, and the whole garage kind of at at that kiddo, being like, come on, one of these things has got to be helpful for you. All right, that's a pretty good list of the yucky stuff. What behaviors will I see or hear you using to get relief from that yucky stuff? And I think I just said one of them, which is throwing the kitchen sink, right? I'm just going to try everything and anything. I might kind of overdo the kind of research around it. Like, I'm going to try to find, all right, you really like this, so I'm going to go for this. Something related, right? Doing over research on related topics. I think you're going to see me also overproducing materials. Oh my gosh, if I find just the right stars, if I find the right Pokemon tokens to use, if I find the right, piece of candy, everything's going to get better. I'm going to get some relief from this stuff that's showing up for me around finding motivators for you. I might phone a friend and just complain a little bit. I'm trying to get my child to clean her room and I cannot motivate her to do it independently. Do a little bit of venting. I might even do a little bit of grumping at my own child, for not wanting to. How come grumping isn't a word? For kind of not having the motivation to follow through with certain things, especially even if she's come up with them. All right, so I'm going to move over to kind of what behaviors will I see or hear you're using to move towards what's important to us as a group today. And I think for me, the first thing that you're going to see or hear me do is a lot of information gathering. I want to look for things that are motivating, things that kind of might be outside of the box, but I want to gather as much information about what matters to that individual. Like, what would motivate them to do something like this? I'm going to collaborate and talk to other people that know the individual better than me. And parents, you guys are the experts on your child, right? You know them the best. What do they care about? What are they motivated to do? Even if it's kind of, outside of the box, but like, what is that? I'm going to be willing to think differently. Wow, that is an outside of the box motivator. I didn't know that isn't what I would have thought. I'm also going to do a lot of talking to them. Some kind of collaborative problem solving, like talk to me out loud about this. Talk to me about what's going on here. How's that working for you? And I'm going to be willing to hear different perspectives. I'm also going to be willing to admit when I was wrong. Wow, I really thought that was going to be motivating to you, but clearly it was not. So I'm going to be willing to say, hey, like I totally messed up there, and that's okay. It's a human thing to do. All right. I know for sure I am going to have a chance to notice all of this stuff showing up as we kind of walk through this crowdcast today. And I hope you do too. And maybe even after. All right, we're going to do a quick loop through the noticing grid, which is the happy medium point of view. I'm going to kind of reduce this size so you can see the whole thing at one time, and then I'll make my screen a little bit bigger. The noticing grid we talked a lot about in the previous crowdcast. It's a great organizational tool. It's a great way to observe an individual's escalation curve. It's a great way to share reactive and proactive supportive strategies. How are we going to support this individual based on levels of escalation? And then what behaviors are we trying to support them in learning so that they can sustain regulation? So in our first column on the noticing grid, those are our noticing levels, right? Level 1, you're matching the environment, you're just right. If you're playing basketball, you're running around, you're fast, you're shooting hoops, you might be doing a little bit of trash talking. But when you're in class, you might be sitting still, you might be asking for breaks when you need it, you might be requesting help when you need it, you might be chit-chatting with friends a little bit. But it's just right for that context and just right for you as who you are as a human. Level 2 is when we're starting to get a little bit too big or a little bit too slow, starting to become dysregulated, right? That's where you might be, kind of losing the basketball game, might be getting the best of you, and you're starting to yell at peers, starting to kind of, trash talk is turning not friendly, not just that friendly kind of banter back and forth between athletes. Or, you might be starting to kind of get frustrated with your work and slamming your pencil down on the table, right? We're just noticing that we're getting a little bit too big for the context. Level 3 is definitely too big. These are dangerous and unsafe behaviors, right? What do those look like? On the basketball court, that might be hitting a friend, or running away, eloping away from the court, to where an adult can't see you or something like that. In the classroom, that might be like standing up and flipping a desk or, screaming swear words at the teacher, while threatening with them, I'm going to stab you with a pencil or something like that. Our next column over is what are other people going to do? How are people going to support you at different levels of regulation, right? How am I going to support you when you're just right? What am I going to do? I'm going to engage with you. I'm going to talk with you. I'm going to give you help when you need it. I'm going to give you space when you need it. What does that look like? Level 2, how am I going to support you when you're starting to become dysregulated? This is obviously where we want to intervene so we don't get to dangerous and unsafe behaviors. But how do we do that? Is it help you get to a safe spot? Is it give you things that help you shift? Is it talk with you? Is it help you problem solve? What does that look like? What are other people going to do to support you? And then at a level 3, how are people going to keep you safe? What are other people going to do to help you stay safe when you're completely dysregulated, too big for the context, and dangerous and unsafe? Our next column over is our skill builder column, right? We all have to do things all day long to sustain regulation. When you're at a level 1, how do you stay there? What do you do, right? When that person in traffic cuts you off and you want to scream and yell at them, right? But you've got your 5-year-old in the back. How do you sustain regulation when life happens, right? You drop your cup of coffee on the way out the door and you don't have time to make another one. How do you stay just right? How do you match the environment when life's happening to you? When you're starting to get a little bit too big, what behaviors can you deploy to help yourself get back to a level 1? What coping skills can you use? Can you think and shift your thinking and talk about your favorite things for a little bit? What can you do to support yourself in getting back to regulated? And then if you get to a level 3, how do you maintain safety? How do you keep yourself safe when you're that dysregulated? All right, that's a quick loop around the noticing grid. And now we will kind of get into some of the meat of what we want to talk about today. I wanted to give you guys an introduction to the DNAV approach. It's a helpful framework for psychological flexibility. There's the Connect program, which is for littles. It comes from across the pond. Actually, all of this comes from Australia and Europe. But this is a very helpful way in organizing the way that we kind of think about how we as individuals respond in the context, and how we kind of socially connect to others, and how we can work together to support each other in kind of valued living. So these are the 6 foundational skills. And you can go to their website, DNAV International. They have a lot of tools. They have a lot of free resources if this is something that really resonates with you. But I do find our little practice, Eclipse Therapy, we definitely operate from this view of psychological flexibility, this lens. It's how we approach treatment for individuals and how we actually communicate and work together as a team. So the first skill is your discoverer skill. This is where you step into the unknown or the uncomfortable. It's how you broaden your network of things that you're learning and doing. It's how you connect with others. You learn a lot through trial and error in your discoverer zone. It's things you haven't done. It's things you don't know yet, but you think it's helpful to try. Our advisor is our inner thinking, right? Like our inner coach, inner critic, kind of judging what we do, evaluating how it turned out. Did that turn out good, bad, okay, excellent? Our advisor is really our group of rules that we've formulated to be efficient, right? To act efficient, to maintain safety for ourselves. And it makes it so that we don't spend our entire life in that discoverer zone, right? Like, we already know what happens if you run a red light in front of a police officer. Most likely you're going to get pulled over and get a ticket, right? It supports us in really acting efficiently because we already know what's going to happen. And our advisor, obviously gets information from our discoverer, but we also learn from others in a social way, right? We tell children rules all the time that they store in their advisor. Like look both ways when you cross the road, right? Most people have not been hit by a car because they didn't look both ways crossing the road, right? They learned that through other people telling them this is a helpful rule to stay alive and safe. Our valuer, which is really our guiding compass, is kind of why we use behavior, right? Like, why is this behavior meaningful to me? What is important about what I am contacting? Who do I want to be, right? These are bigger things, right? I want to be helpful. I want to be kind. I want to be, hey, Angelise, I want to be I want to be a productive person, right? Our valuer is kind of that compass that guides the behaviors that we're going to contact. Our noticer is our senses and our emotions, our body awareness, right? I notice this emotion showing up. I'm feeling this. I'm smelling this, right? It's our noticing. It's our information gathering center, right? And then how do we respond to those things that are showing up? I always say kind of all roads lead back to noticing, right? Because you got to notice. You've got to notice so much. There's so many things for us to notice. What's showing up for us in our self-view, right? Our self-view kind of supports us in breaking free from those self-limiting beliefs. That we don't have to be defined by things that we've already done. We can move forward. We're capable of growing. We're capable of doing better. We're capable of moving in a more efficient fashion towards those values. Our social view is kind of how we connect with others, right? Using all of our other DNAV tools, how do we notice what's showing up for others? What our noticer notices for them, right? What rules do we have that might be helpful for us, but not helpful for others, right? Really bringing together that kind of interconnected of humans, right? We don't just operate in little silos, we operate together and independently, right? This is all kind of intermeshed together, which I think is why this DNAV framework is so helpful for kind of framing a lot of the discussions that we'll have today and in the future. And I really do love kind of one of the things that DNAV says about kind of other people, right? There are heaven and our hell, right? It's amazing when you're connected and things are going well, and it really can be terrible when they're not. So I think that's kind of helpful to remember, right? We aren't always looking through our rose-colored glasses, especially when we're interacting with people who have different views than us. All right. So now let's get started kind of chatting about what we really came here to talk about now that we've kind of laid the framework down. But the first thing I wanted to kind of throw out there is, what is your notice about motivation, right? There's two kind of forms of motivation. One is aversive motivation, right? So a person's motivated to move away from an aversive activity, event, environmental condition, or, a person. So any child, a child under kind of punishment, threat, or they feel like they need to remove an aversive activity, event, environment, or person is kind of under that aversive motivation condition, right? I have no idea why that error keeps happening. And when you're looking at kind of things like your child is intentionally deprived of something that's motivating for them, right? So a long time ago, a long time ago, I'm going to say an individual here. A long time ago, we used to arrange the environment where before a therapist would come to a home, we would put motivating things. We would ask the family to put motivating things up so that when we got there, we could open up those motivating containers and that individual would be much more excited to work with us, right? We would increase the value of those items by depriving them of them before we got there. So when we think about that and motivation, that really is a little bit of aversive motivation. We're taking things that we know they love and we're depriving of them so that we can use them as motivators later. So what can that look like? When an individual is kind of under aversive control or aversive motivation, we might see a lot of aggression. We might see a lot of fight and flight, escape, avoidance, right? I want to move away from this. We might see a lot of inaction, right? Like we've got those individuals that might kind of go into that fight or flight mode. And we might see individuals that are in kind of that freeze mode, right? Like I can't do anything. I'm going to withdraw. I'm going to tune out. I might feel sick. There might kind of come some behaviors where you're like, whoa, where did this come from? This makes no sense here. We actually might see them actively seek out punishment or those aversive events, or different kind of activities, right? Like that kiddo that asks you to do a worksheet and then really wants to just rip that worksheet up. We might see kids that lose their ability to suppress kind of those bigger behaviors, right? It's like it's 0 to hero really quick. There's no middle ground there. We might see some counter kind of coercion, right? Like trying to control the environment, trying to turn on the charm to manipulate the situation. Those are all things that we see when an individual is under that kind of aversive motivation condition. So the other one is kind of appetitive motivation. And I know these words are kind of like, oh, these words are a little bit hard, but once you get it, it's pretty, it is helpful framework, right? So appetitive motivation is when the child's seeking out access to those items, activities, places, people, right? They're actively moving towards it. Some people might describe that as kind of intrinsic motivation, right? They want to contact that. That's a value to them. And you might see them persist through some yucky stuff to contact that, right? Like they might be able to be okay. 9 times out of 10 being in a crowd of people is really aversive for them. But in order to see their favorite concert artist, you're going to see them tolerate standing in line. This is where it can get really tricky because you're like, wait a second, you can't do that in this situation. But in this situation, you can. And it's very different. In one context, they might be under that kind of aversive control. I want to move away from this. Crowds in the hall at school are too much for me. But when they're under appetitive motivation, moving towards that favorite, singer, concert, movie, release of a new toy, right? They're able to tolerate more people in a packed location than in a hall of school. So what does that look like? It looks like communication, right? Communicating what you want to do, being just right, being at that level 1 on the noticing grid, moving towards those locations, activities, environments, or people. I have a child who, certain classes, certain teachers are more challenging for her than others. And I can tell kind of when she's under aversive motivation to kind of go and get that stuff done versus appetitive motivation when she's like, I'm so excited to go see Mrs. So-and-so to do da 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 da. Those are very apparent because of the behaviors that she uses to move towards those teachers or really just gut it out and get away from those other individuals. You might see sharing control, following directions more easily, compromising, being willing to come up with compromises, right? When we're under kind of aversive motivation, right, our availability of choices kind of shrinks and we don't see many alternatives. When an individual is under that kind of appetitive motivation, we're going to see kind of an opening, a broadening of their skills where maybe they're willing to compromise, even if maybe it's not like, a great compromise, but they can see a option to compromise. There's that give and take and a willingness to try. That willingness to persist is huge. So when we think about that, when we kind of have that framework of that aversive motivation, that appetitive motivation, just pause for a second and think about for yourself, right? We're thinking about your self view right now. This is from inside you, kind of your history, your experiences for the world. What emotions show up for you when we think about contexts that we've been under aversive motivation versus kind of those times that we've been under appetitive motivation, right? And I can think a lot of examples for me fall into like nutrition and exercise for this, right? Anytime I'm under aversive control or motivation to do a better job eating or exercising, those plans kind of like fail in a heartbeat. I get frustrated, angry, annoyed, and I'm pretty quick to move away from that. Whereas if it's kind of my choice, like I have got myself, I'm contacting that this is important to me. I am certainly under kind of appetitive control. I'm much willing to kind of persist through that yucky stuff that shows up to kind of get myself to that space that I want to be. But what emotions show up for you under those two different contexts? And then once you think about that, what body sensations show up for you, right, that go along with that? I certainly know when I'm under kind of aversive motivation, I am going to be slightly dysregulated, kind of sitting on that edge of a level 2, might be a little bit more jittery, might be a little bit more withdrawn, right? But what body sensations show up for you under those different motivating conditions as an adult, as you? I'll give you a second to think about it before I keep talking. I'm pretty good at chatting. Then when we're kind of thinking about kind of from this self-view, what emotions show up for you when you thought what you were doing was going to be motivating for your child? It was going to be in that appetitive motivation zone. They were going to want to move towards it, but it isn't, right? I can think of some different contexts where, I set up like, a play date and I got some cool, cookie decorating stuff. And it was not what my child was interested in doing on that play date. I thought that was going to be a fun time for her to connect with friends, and it turned out not. And man, I was a little bit resentful. I was like, why do I even plan these things? A little bit mad. Certainly got pretty grumpy about that type of thing. So I had to kind of notice what emotions are showing up for me, because what I thought was going to work didn't. It wasn't motivating for my child. Or, creating a brand new system I'm like, all right, we got this. Like, she's going to hang up her swim stuff when she gets home. She's going to put her shoes in the bin. She's going to take her clean clothes up the stairs. Her room is going to be clean. Her closet is not going to have clothes all over the floor. And I'm going to offer this, great system. Bam, failed. Didn't even last 2 days. Wasn't motivating for her. She that didn't work for her for that situation. So what kind of emotions show up in those contexts, right? When what you tried and what you tried so hard didn't work. And I guess I didn't finish that thought, but I'm pretty sure my thought was, what emotions show up when you kind of unexpectedly stumble upon a motivator, right? Every once in a while, we kind of get lucky and we stumble upon a motivator for our human. What emotions show up then, right? It's probably pretty light emotions. Those are kind of exciting moments. Wow, that was really cool to see you do that, right? To see you actually step up, move towards that under that appetitive motivation. Here I am. This is what I want to do. It turns out pretty awesome. And I love when that happens. And normally, if I allow my child to set up her own system, that happens much more frequently than when I'm trying to set up something for her. So next up, kind of what does our noticer say about motivation under those aversive conditions or repetitive conditions from our social view, right? When we're looking at our child, right? When we're trying to connect with them, we're trying to support them in motivation. What does our noticer say about that? What's showing up for us? So, what emotions show up for your child when they're under aversive motivation? What emotions show up under repetitive motivation, right? So when they're trying to get something done, I kind of call it the gut it out strategy. Under aversive motivation, it's like you've got 5 minutes to do your homework. Otherwise, you don't get dessert. What emotions show up under those conditions for your child? Do they gut it out? They just hurry up, get it done? Did they really work on that math worksheet? Did they really engage in that conversation with you? Or were they kind of just gutting it out? And what emotions show up kind of during that phase, right? When they're kind of like just sitting there, just sitting there, gutting out whatever it is you've asked them to do. They want to move away from it, but you've asked them to do it, so they're just going to gut it out. What emotions are showing up for them during those times? And then how about a appetitive motivation that they're motivated to move towards that thing, right? Maybe I don't know why I'm stuck on school today. Maybe it's because I did a whole science project with my child yesterday that actually was under appetitive control. She wanted to work on that science project. That was really interesting to her. It was interesting to do the research, right? She wanted to learn more. That science project went faster than reading one chapter in a book. It was an entire science project, last minute, but it was something that she was motivated to do. So the emotions that showed up for her, even though it was like 10 times the amount of work than reading one small chapter in a book, it went faster. The emotions that showed up for her were lighter. They were easier to carry than when I've asked her in the past and even dangled a carrot of like, hey, for every chapter you read, I'll give you $2 or something like that. Even that. And my child's pretty highly motivated by money, right? When the task is so hard, she wants to move away from it. Even the carrot doesn't work. The emotions that are showing up for her are really heavy. It's frustrated, it's mad, it's annoyed, it's angry, it's I can't believe you're making me do this, mom. Right? And then what body sensations go with that? How can you kind of use that social view and your noticer to notice what shows up when your child's under those aversive conditions, right? What's it like for them to be kind of all closed down, right? Are they taking shorter breaths? Are they all kind of clenched up? I know when my child gets mad, I see the clenched fist and the clenched jaw, right? And the gut it out. I can't believe you're making me do this, mom. Type of things that show up for her. And I can notice that, right? What emotions show up when they don't have motivation to do anything, right? When dangling stuff doesn't work, right? Like, money's important, video games are important, TV's important. um what's important, right? A bag of fruit snacks, like, you never give them sugar, and that's exciting, but they still don't want to engage in anything. What kind of emotions from that social view do you think show up for them when they're in that space, right? I know from a self view, frustration shows up for me, anger shows up for me, disappointment shows up for me. But what's showing up for them when they have no motivation to engage in anything, especially the things that we would like them to engage in? So now, kind of moving on to our advisor, right? Our advisor is kind of that inner critic, inner coach, kind of evaluating what we're doing. This is a really critical piece of motivation, right? Because we each, as parents, as adults, as humans, have a history with motivation. We have a history from our self view of kind of what works for us, but we really have to evaluate those, right? Like, what do we believe to be true about motivation, about reinforcers? What are things that you find yourself saying, this should work? This should be motivating. Everyone's motivated by this, right? What are those rules or firm beliefs that sorry, my phone's going off like crazy today. What are those kind of beliefs that you have to be true about motivation from your self view, right? What are those rules that you personally have? And are they helpful? Do you kind of spend some time thinking about that, right? Like, are your rules or beliefs about motivation, do they help you? Do they hurt you? Are they kind of neutral? But what are those beliefs? Kind of taking some time to notice those and really think about kind of how they work for you. What's the workability there? And then how does your advisor judge you about motivation, right? So when you're highly motivated for something, like, how does that, usually that's the time your inner coach kind of comes out and like keeps you going, right? Like, you got like pep talks coming from your advisor, right? That coach is saying, hey, you're doing an awesome job. Look at that. You got up at, 5:30 to get your exercise in. You would never have done that a year ago, right? Like, that inner coach tends to be really helpful when your motivation's high, when you're moving towards what's important to you, when you're under that appetitive conditions, right? Like, you want to move towards what you're doing. And then, when we're not as motivated, right, or our motivation kind of fizzles out, that inner critic can really step up and kind of give us a hard time, right? Like, you should be getting off the couch. Like, why haven't you gotten that laundry done? Why is the house still a mess, right? And that inner critic really kind of starts to kind of jump in there, right? So how do you support yourself? How do you notice those kind of different advisor moments and whether or not they're helpful for you? Some people are motivated by kind of getting away from that inner critic and moving forward. Other people, it keeps us in a hole, right? It limits us to kind of moving forward to do what we want to do. And then similarly, right, what does our advisor say about motivation from that social view, right? What rules do you hold about your child's motivation, about things that are reinforcing to them? Are they helpful? Are they not? Right? I'm super motivated by, I don't like to be late. I like to, do things, in a timely manner. I do still kind of work at the last minute, which is okay too. But that works really well for me, right? But it's motivating for me to be on time. Those are things that kind of tend to be helpful. Kind of being that perfectionist, right? Not so helpful at times when I want to switch things up 85 times. right? But what rules do you hold about your child's motivation? Are they helpful in your view, in your connection with your child, right? Are you looking at motivation from your perspective, from your self view, from just your child's perspective, or are you looking at it that shared perspective, right? I think that we have kind of these kind of I don't know, almost society, cultural views on what should be motivating, right? Like all kids like when we kind of dangle carrots of candy. All kids enjoy stickers, right? Like just give them a sticker for that. I don't know how many parents I've talked to that have tried to potty train, especially kids pooping on the potty with like a sticker chart. You know, you got a sticker every time you poop in the potty. Um, and they're like, gosh, like this should work, right? These sticker charts work. And they don't, right? Their kiddo is still kind of running over in the corner and kind of pooping in the corner rather than pooping in the potty, right? All kids are motivated by, hey, if you do what you don't like, then you can have something you do like, right? Like if you clean your room, I'll give you an extra half an hour of TV. My child is actually a kiddo that doesn't work very well for. She'll kind of just blow me off for things like that. That isn't motivating. Whereas I myself am pretty good at that. Like, oh gosh, go out there and, do a little bit of exercise and you can have your bowl of ice cream today. That does work pretty well to kind of motivate me to do things that I don't really like to do. A lot of teachers, classrooms, therapists use token boards, right? A token board is helpful for everybody. It's really important to evaluate, is that token board helpful? Is that kind of an aversive condition for your child that they're just trying to work on getting all those tokens so that they can get time to kind of, stim out on their iPad, or so they can get away from the adult that's kind of demanding that they work on a fine motor activity. I'm just throwing things out there, right? First then is a lot of us think first then, or that kind of non-preferred to preferred, is like what we do for a paycheck, right? Or that token board is a little bit like how we might be coached during like a tennis lesson. And there really is so much more that goes into it than kind of doing something you don't like to just get a paycheck. Most of us, hopefully, are in a position where we're under kind of that appetitive control for our paycheck, right? We're moving towards it because we like what we're doing, not necessarily because we just have to get that paycheck. So it's really important to kind of view that motivation from your child's perspective, from your perspective, and then how do you bring that kind of shared perspective together, right? Points and level systems are how the world works, right? Sign on so many new clients, you get an advance, right? Not all jobs work like that. Point and level systems aren't motivating for all kids. They work great for some kids. And actually my child, even though she doesn't like the first then, non-preferred to preferred, she actually loves point and level systems. She'll design them for herself, implement them herself, and it works excellent. It doesn't work so it's more under aversive control when I design it. When she designs it, it's something that she wants to move towards. There are also individuals that I've seen that love to design those systems for themselves, but then when they go to implement them, it becomes aversive for them, right? So that's something that we as the adults can notice in that social view, and we can be like, all right, like I hear that, I see that, that's different. So, am I able to use my social perspective and noticer skills to see the difference, right, between me and my child, right? How can I notice what works and what doesn't work, what's helpful and what's not helpful? How can I pick those pieces that are from that appetitive control that my child wants to move towards? How can I arrange opportunities to kind of put that in my advisor, help myself be more efficient? And how can I kind of let go of some of those kind of preconceived notions that I have around this is what should be motivating, right? A token economy should work for my child. A level system should work. This first then board should work for my child. How can I let go of some of those things that I think should be, that are kind of a not helpful rule, and hold on to those things that we do know are helpful. So this is a great time to step into that discoverer space, right? If we're kind of stuck in that kind of self-limiting advisor space, where we're like, these things should work, but they're not. How do we step into that discoverer space, do some trial and error learning? Is my child motivated like I am? Or are there differences between us? Right? Different isn't bad always. It can be okay. Or how does my child approach kind of different environments, right? How do they approach, a new activity, right? How do they approach like going to Elage's, the amusement park? How do they approach the water rides versus how they approach the roller coasters versus the swings, right? How do they approach that? Is it the way you thought? Is it the way you predicted? Is it the way your advisor kind of told you they were going to approach that? Is it completely different? Is the way they approach that okay? Does it work? Does it work for them? Does it work for you? Does it work for others? Right? So my child who enjoys kind of designing her own systems, that definitely works at home, but it's not always going to work in the school context. So what is going to work for her in the school context? Right? Same thing with, they're using tokens or level systems, right? It's so much easier to implement those in one context. As soon as you get on the move, it's more challenging, right? Do you always have bucks in your pocket? Do you always have tokens in your pocket to deliver, right? Do you always have points to offer? Do you have your point sheet with you, right? How is that going to work for them and you in different contexts? So, can we use what we already know, right? Can we use what we know about your child? Can you use that? Can you use that history of intervention? What worked really well as kind of motivators? What did they want to move towards? What are the types of people that they enjoy? What are people that they tend to move towards, right? All of us have a different personality, right? And I see this all the time across homes, right? Uh, Women or moms, we tend to be a little bit more excited, and we try to get dads to be a little bit more excited too. Dads just aren't like that cheerleader coach. So, when your child really enjoys that peppy enthusiasm, we know that's awesome, right? And that your child might move towards that, but we also know that not everybody's going to be able to do that. So what's going to work in that context across people is really important. Are we digging for information and asking the right questions, right? Sometimes we forget to talk, right, to our kids and say, hey, like, how is this going to work? Is this kind of right now, right in this present moment? Is this why this is motivating or not motivating? Or are we kind of working from history, right? Man, this really didn't work for me in the past and I am not trying it again, right? We've got some of those failed attempts. Heavy emotions come with failed attempts, right? Is it my child's learning history? Do we have enough information, right? What's happening, right? What does it look like? Where? When? Are we asking our child to complete a single behavior or is it a chain of behaviors? Is there a breakdown in some of the steps that they're not motivated to complete, right? Is one part of the task too hard, right? But all of these things we can step into that discoverer space to look at, right? Why is this motivation failing? Is it a small detail? Is it a big piece of this? But why, right? Why are we failing here? All right. So next up, we're going to kind of talk from a valuer perspective. Kind of what does our valuer say about motivation, reinforcement from that kind of self view first? So I pulled this list of values from Brene Brown, who I love her stuff. I also love Susan David's stuff about emotional agility. But this is just kind of a list of values. I think so often we get a little bit kind of, I don't know, crisscrossed in our brain about kind of the difference between a value and a goal, right? Are we motivated or under that kind of appetitive motivation to move towards a value or to move towards a goal? And one of the ways that I kind of differentiate a value and a goal is a value is something that you're constantly kind of moving towards, right? Like it's not like an end destination. Like I don't just all of a sudden show up and say, I have arrived at ethics. I am now an ethical human and I will be forever, right? Or man, I have arrived at simplicity, right? Those are things that are ongoing, right? Like I'm constantly using behaviors to move towards being kind of that kind individual that I hope to be. Some days I do better than others based on my availability, right? So a value is something you're constantly moving towards. Whereas when we're thinking about being motivated to accomplish a goal, there is an end destination there, right? Working out for, I'm going to work out 3 days a week for a month. I can check that off. I can meet that goal. That's accomplished. I can create a new goal that might support me in health, right? In moving towards health, right? So goals are kind of like little milestones on our adventure of kind of meeting our values in a way that's important to us. So if we kind of look through these values, and I like this list, this is kind of a shorter list than some other lists, but you can even break down into more parts if you want, but that's a whole nother crowdcast. So when we think about values, right, we're hoping to be kind of under that appetitive control, right? We want to use behaviors to move towards the things that we value. We want to deploy behaviors because we want to kind of move towards those values. So if you pause and kind of think about that, what drives you to engage in helpful or not helpful behaviors? What are those motivations behind that, right? And we thought about it a little bit earlier from that kind of noticer perspective, from kind of what emotions show up from when we are under that kind of aversive trying to move away from things or appetitive trying to move towards them, right? But now think about it kind of from both that noticer and valuer perspective, right? Those emotions that show up and that will or drive to move towards those things that you value, right? On that list above, how many values do you have, right? Like how many can you pull out that these are important to me. These are values that I try to live by. And then when you're thinking about that, like, do you have different priority levels within that, right? High, medium, low importance, kind of what are the importance of those values to you? And how do they motivate you to accomplish goals, right? Like, how do those values drive your decision to use a behavior that moves you towards a goal, ultimately moving you closer to a value, right? How do we do that, right? How does motivation work there? And how does it feel different when you're under that aversive conditions where you're doing something to get away from something or you're doing something because you want to be there, right? What does your noticer notice when you contact something that's of higher importance to you? Is that more reinforcing to you? Is that more salient? Do you want to go do that again? Does your motivation kind of ebb and flow, or is it pretty consistent in movement towards your values, right? Now, if we kind of think about it from kind of a social view, right? Specifically thinking about your human, but can you identify your child's values, right? What do you observe them naturally doing, right? Little kiddos are not going to just say, hey, I value kindness, right? Or, I value ingenuity, right? But you're going to see those individuals seeking out other children who are sad and being helpful. You're going to see that individual giving up kind of, their treat because somebody else's fell on the ground. You're going to see that individual being helpful to others, helping a friend who dropped all their books out of their backpack, right? What do they naturally do that you can connect to that larger category of a value that they might not be able to developmentally label that with that overarching word, but what do you observe them doing, right? What do they talk about? What do they show you? What do they pull you towards? How do they like to have conversations? Right? I have a very empathetic child who, if I'm showing any way, shape, or form an emotion at home that isn't kind of my, homeostasis or like a light emotion, she checks in with me and she'll continually check in with me. So one of her values is having empathy for others and being caring. But if I ask her, what are your values? She's not going to kind of say, I'm empathetic and caring. She's going to say, I care about other people, things like that. Right. So you can also think little kiddos, right? Do they have things that are important to them? Right? Do they have a lot of things that are important, or do they only have a few things, like one thing, like I only watch Paw Patrol, or I only play with Thomas the Train, right? Do they have a lot of things that are important to them, or just a very few, or kind of in the middle? Can they move between things that are of value to them, right? Can they play Thomas the Train and then go play Paw Patrol and maybe then play some Play-Doh? Or is everything involving kind of that one Thomas the Train, right? Can they ebb and flow between those things that they really care about and value, right? That's where we get that burnout, right? Like, I have played Thomas the Train so much, I can't play it anymore. I've watched this series. This is the only TV show that I want. And now that it's done, I've got nothing to do because I only cared about that TV show. Or man, I've been totally into this science thing. And now I've finished this science experiment and now I've got nothing to do. I've studied everything there is to study about planets and now I've got nothing to do. So do they have degrees of interest, degrees of value? How does that motivation move towards those things ebb and flow? So all of this information, because motivation is so complex, right? There's kind of that aversive motivation, that appetitive motivation. There's ebbing and flowing of motivation. So one of the most important things when we're talking about motivation in general is contact with things that are of potential value and developing those degrees of motivation and expanding your child's repertoire of things that they will contact, things that they will do, so that they have more things that are under that appetitive umbrella, under that I want to move towards that umbrella. I want to do this because it's important to me, not just because somebody wants me to do this or I want to get this done to get away from it. But this is important to me. Right? So we know those guys, right? They just don't want to do anything new, right? New is scary, new is bad, different is bad, unexpected is bad. Even when we know if you would just do this, you would really enjoy it, right? You would really like this if you just tried it. So something you can do to support that individual, right, where it's like one and done, I've got nothing else, is to support them when they have that hyper focus, right? Hyper focus is not bad, right? Hyper focus supports a lot of individuals and a lot of very bright individuals in accomplishing amazing things, right? Absolutely amazing things. But sometimes we need to kind of intersperse some other things within that so that we don't burn out, right? We aren't left with anything when we've accomplished that hyper focus or that hyper interest, right? So when we're in a hyper interest phase or we're kind of stuck in this is the only thing that's motivating, we can use this distress tolerance hierarchy to support getting in little wedges of something different, trying to expand that repertoire of things that we will move towards that are motivating to us. And they aren't going to be as motivating as that hyper focus, right? But hopefully we can start to get in there where we've got some degrees of motivation so that our hyper focus isn't our only focus, right? And we can start by just talking about it, throwing things out there. They don't have to try it. They don't have to do it. But you can get in there, you can get and move all the way up to like, hey, we are going to try this, something different, something new. So the other thing that you can do is support in kind of categorizing, right? Because we've got, especially when we've got that one hyper focus, that one thing that's motivating, that is the best, the only thing, there's zero motivation for anything else. We can support in developing those degrees with kind of teaching them okay, better, best, right? Like, it's super exciting and motivating, to go to Slick City. I don't know if everybody knows what Slick City is. It's like this place with slides. We had Jump Street or whatever that had all, trampolines and stuff. And now we've got something called Slick City. So it's the best to go to Slick City with like 5 of my friends, right? And that's highly motivating. I'll do whatever you want me to do. I'm gonna clean my room. I'm gonna make sure there's no clothes on the closet. I'll even do the dishes for you, Mom. I want to go to Slick City. Right. But also recognizing like, hey, maybe going to Slick City with one friend is better. Maybe going to Slick City on just a date with your mom is okay. Right. Those are different degrees of motivation. Right. And what we accomplish to get there might be different. So those are different ways that you can support kind of the all or nothing motivation. And we will definitely do another crowdcast kind of around this, as today we really kind of just set the scene for motivation, thinking about it from your self perspective, from your social perspective, thinking about it and noticing kind of different emotions that show up, noticing kind of whether our child or even ourselves are under that kind of aversive motivation where we want to move away from things, or that appetitive motivation where we want to move towards things. But bottom line, motivation's different for everyone. So check in with that advisor, right? Notice when you've got helpful and not helpful rules about what's going to be motivating or what is motivating for your child. And it's okay to break free from those old rules and kind of create unique ways for your child to be motivated. And notice they'll lead you there, right? Or use the distress tolerance hierarchy to support them in starting to contact things that you think that they might be interested in, but just right now kind of have that, nope, I am doing this one and only thing. All right. Anyway, see you guys in a couple of weeks with another kind